Hello and welcome. We have a substantial subject to cover today. We're turning our attention to the Pacific Northwest to conduct a thorough exploration of Nirvana,
Right.
the American rock band. It's not an exaggeration to say they fundamentally shifted the cultural landscape of the 1990s.
It really isn't. When you look at the broader history of rock music, Nirvana stands as the figurehead of Generation X. They were the catalysts.
The catalyst that popularized alternative rock and just ended the dominance of hair metal. It was a complete sea change.
And what's maybe most remarkable is that their career as a mainstream act only lasted about 3 years. A very short window.
3 years. Yet, here we are, decades later, and their story is still unfolding. We're discussing new developments, very recent ones.
That's right.
So that's our mission for this discussion. We're going to trace their entire trajectory from a small logging town in Washington state all the way to global superstardom, their dissolution, and the continued legacy right up to the reunions we've seen in early 2025.
It's a story that warrants this level of detail. It's full of contrasts. You have this fusion of heavy metal and pop, the quiet verses and the loud choruses.
Right. And we'll get into the internal dynamics, too. Everything from the revolving door of drummers early on to the royalty disputes that caused some serious friction.
And then the post-breakup legal battles, which were complicated to say the least. And now these recent celebrations of the music. It's a long and complex story.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. The origins of the band take us to Aberdeen, Washington in the late 1980s.
Aberdeen is such a crucial backdrop for this narrative.
This is where singer and guitarist Kurt Cobain and bassist Kristen Novoselic first met. They were both at Aberdeen High School.
Yeah, and it was a logging town. That environment, that sense of isolation really contributed to the music that would eventually come out of there.
They became friends while frequenting the practice space of another local band, the Melvins.
And the Melvins were a huge influence on them. But it's important to note, it wasn't an immediate musical partnership between Cobain and Novoselic.
No, it wasn't. That's a really interesting point. Cobain actually wanted to form a band with Novoselic for quite a while.
He gave him a demo tape, right?
He did. A demo for his own project, which was called Fecal Matter. But Novoselic didn't respond right away.
Not at all. It actually took 3 years for him to finally listen to that demo and suggest they start a group.
3 years. That delay is significant. It shows this was not some overnight thing. The roots were very slow to take hold.
Definitely. And when they finally did form their first band, it wasn't Nirvana. Not even close, really.
They called themselves the Sellouts.
The Sellouts.
And it wasn't a punk project. It wasn't a grunge prototype. It was a Creedence Clearwater Revival tribute band.
That detail often surprises people. You've had Novoselic on guitar and vocals and Cobain on drums.
Plain CCR covers.
It was a short-lived project, but it shows they were just, looking for any way to play music together. They tried another project with original material in late '86 with a drummer named Bob McFadden, but that fell apart after just a month.
So by early 1987, they get more serious. They recruit a drummer, Aaron Burkhardt.
Right. And now they're practicing material from that Fecal Matter tape, but they also started writing new songs very quickly.
But this period was also defined by a real identity crisis when it came to their name. They cycled through a whole list of them.
A very varied list. It really captures the indecision of a young band trying to find its footing. They went by names like Skid Row,
Pencap Chew,
Bliss, and maybe the most unusual one, Ted Ed Fred.
Ted Ed Fred. It's certainly a contrast to the name they eventually chose.
A huge contrast.
They played under the name Nirvana for the first time on March 19, 1988. It was at the Community World Theater in Tacoma.
And the flyer for that concert is interesting because it actually listed all the previous names, probably to make sure the audience knew who they were.
Hey, it's us, Ted Ed Fred, also known as Pencap Chew.
Exactly. But the choice of the name Nirvana was very intentional. Cobain explained it later. He said he wanted a name that was beautiful, nice, and pretty.
He wanted to contrast it with the punk bands of the time.
Right. The mean, raunchy names, as he put it, like the Angry Samoans. He was looking for something that suggested a higher state, or at least something more aesthetically pleasing than, Ted Ed Fred.
There was a legal hurdle with that name, though.
There was. A British band also named Nirvana. They eventually had to reach an out-of-court settlement over the usage.
Part of the business reality they were starting to encounter.
But before they could worry about international trademark law, they had to solve their rhythm section issues. That was the big problem.
The drummer carousel.
The early years were characterized by a revolving door of drummers. It was very unstable.
It was. Aaron Burkhardt, who they recruited in '87, was the first. But then Novoselic moved to Tacoma, and Cobain moved to Olympia, Washington.
And they just lost contact with him for a bit.
Temporarily, yeah.
Yeah.
So consequently, they started practicing with Dale Crover of the Melvins.
Crover is such a significant figure in this whole scene. He's the one who recorded the first Nirvana demos with them in January 1988.
But he couldn't stay. He was moving to San Francisco shortly after.
So he recommended a replacement, Dave Foster.
Foster's tenure was difficult. It involved a stint in jail, which really hindered the band's stability.
And Burkhart actually came back for a bit after that, didn't he?
He did, briefly. But then he departed again after telling Cobain he was too hungover to practice one day.
Which highlights the lack of professional discipline at that stage. It was very loose.
To say the least. Finally, they were introduced to Chad Channing.
And Channing's story of joining is interesting. He noted that they never formally told him, "You're in the band."
He just kept showing up.
He just continued jamming with them.
Yeah.
He played his first show in May 1988, and that was that. He was in. This solidified the lineup that would take them into their first album era.
And that brings us to the Sub Pop era. In November of 1988, they released their first single.
A cover of Love Buzz by Shocking Blue, and it was released on the Seattle independent label Sub Pop.
Sub Pop is a central element in this story. They were the label for the Seattle grunge scene.
They really were. So Nirvana began recording their debut album, Bleach, with a local producer, Jack Endino.
And the influences on this record were very specific.
Very. You can hear the heavy dirge rock of the Melvins, the 1980s punk of Mudhoney, and even the 1970s heavy metal of Black Sabbath.
The production of Bleach is famous for its budget, or lack thereof. The recording cost listed on the album sleeve was $606.17.
An incredibly low figure when you consider the eventual impact of the band, and the source of that money is a story in itself.
It wasn't from Sub Pop.
No, it was supplied by a guy named Jason Everman.
Right. And because he provided the funding, he was credited as a second guitarist on the album sleeve.
Yeah, to make him feel at home in the band, to make him feel like a full member.
But he didn't actually play on the album at all.
Not a single note on Bleach. He did join the band as a second guitarist for the tour that followed, but his time with them was short.
Differences arose, and the band ended up canceling the last few dates of their first national tour to go back to Washington.
And Everman was fired, but in a very passive way. No one actually told him directly.
So
He later said he simply quit. But the communication was clearly not there.
So Bleach comes out in June of 1989. It was popular on college radio.
It did well for an indie debut. It sold an initial 40,000 copies. That's a very respectable number.
But the band was dissatisfied.
Cobain, in particular, was upset by Sub Pop's lack of promotion and distribution. He felt the label was favoring other bands on their roster.
And musically, he was also shifting.
He was. He mentioned in an interview that his early songs were very angry, but as his mood improved, the songs were becoming more pop-oriented. He was starting to write about conflicts in relationships, about emotions.
This tension with the label, combined with the evolving sound, led to another change in the lineup.
Right. We mentioned Chad Channing. By April 1990, when they started working on new material with producer Butch Vig, Cobain and Novoselic were becoming disenchanted with his drumming.
And Channing was also frustrated.
He was. He wanted more input into the songwriting process. So it's a classic case of creative differences.
Channing left, and the band recorded the single Sliver with Mudhoney's drummer Dan Peters in July 1990. But they needed a permanent solution.
They needed their guy.
Enter Dave Grohl.
In September 1990, Buzz Osborne, there's the Melvins connection again, introduced them to Grohl. His DC hardcore band, Scream, had just broken up.
And the first impressions were memorable.
They were. Grohl later said he thought Cobain and Novoselic looked like psycho lumberjacks on the record cover. He was surprised this was the band he was about to audition for.
But the musical chemistry was immediate.
Instantaneous. Novoselic said they knew within 2 minutes that Grohl was the right drummer. The power, the precision. It was just what they were missing.
So with a lineup of Cobain, Novoselic, and Grohl finally set, the band was ready to make a move.
They were very disenchanted with Sub Pop at this point and were actively seeking a major label deal.
And Sonic Youth's Kim Gordon recommended them to DGC Records.
Management played a huge role here, too. Susan Silver, who was managing Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, she advised them and introduced them to the industry properly.
So signing to DGC in 1990 was the turning point.
Yeah.
They began recording their major label debut, Nevermind.
They went back to work with Butch Vig, but this time at Sound City Studios in Los Angeles, a much bigger operation.
The production process had its complexities, though. They had songs like In Bloom and Breathe that had been around for years, but other songs.
Others, like On a Plane, lacked finished lyrics until midway through the recording sessions. Cobain was still finalizing things in the studio.
And then there was the whole mixing process. The band wasn't satisfied with the initial mixes Vig did.
No, they felt they weren't powerful enough. So Andy Wallace, who had worked with Slayer, was brought in to create the final mix.
Which sounded incredible to the public, but the band.
The band later complained that the result was too polished. They felt it smoothed over their rough edges a little too much.
But regardless of their feelings on the mix, the album was a phenomenon. DGC was hoping to sell maybe 250,000 copies.
Yeah, similar numbers to Sonic Youth's Goo. That was the benchmark.
But the reality was vastly different.
It was a massive, massive success. Smells Like Teen Spirit became completely omnipresent on MTV and radio. You couldn't escape it.
And by Christmas of 1991, Nevermind was selling 400,000 copies a week.
A week. Just an astronomical number.
And then came that symbolic moment in January 1992.
The Michael Jackson moment.
Nevermind displaced Michael Jackson's album Dangerous at #1 on the Billboard charts.
That moment it's historically viewed as this significant cultural shift. It's the point where the 80s officially ended and the 90s began.
It's credited with ending the popularity of hair metal and bringing alternative rock, this niche genre, to the global mainstream.
Suddenly, punk aesthetics and themes of alienation were the dominant force in pop culture. It changed everything.
But with that massive success came massive internal tension.
It did. In March of 1992, just a couple of months after hitting #1, the band nearly broke up over songwriting royalties.
This is a critical point in their internal dynamics. What was the issue?
Well, up to that point, the royalties had been split equally among the three of them. Cobain sought to reorganize this to better reflect that he wrote the majority of the music and lyrics.
Which Grohl and Novoselic didn't necessarily object to.
No, they understood. But Cobain wanted the agreement to be retroactive to the release of Nevermind.
So he wanted to take back money that had already been allocated to them.
Precisely. And that caused about a week of severe tension. They almost broke up over it.
But they worked it out.
They did. Cobain eventually received a retroactive share of 75% of the music royalties, but bad feelings lingered for a while. It definitely created a rift.
Despite the tension and the constant rumors of a breakup due to Cobain's health, they continued to perform. Their 1992 headlining set at the Reading Festival is legendary.
It's often cited as one of their greatest performances. Cobain even programmed the lineup for the festival that year.
And we should also talk about the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards.
Another classic Nirvana moment of defiance.
The network forbade them from playing their new song, Rape Me.
They thought the title was too controversial for a live broadcast.
So in response, Cobain gets on stage and teases the intro to Rape Me on live television before they switch into playing Lithium.
It was a perfect example of their punk ethos clashing with corporate constraints. They were always pushing back.
To fill the gap between albums and also to curb the bootleg market, they released a B-Sides and Rarities compilation called Incesticide in December 1992.
But the real focus was on the follow-up to Nevermind, the album that would become In Utero.
And for In Utero, which came out in 1993, they made a very specific choice in producer.
A very deliberate one. They chose Steve Albini.
And he had a reputation for a very raw, natural recording style. He had strong underground credentials.
And that's exactly what Cobain wanted. He wanted to move as far away from the polished sound of Nevermind as possible. He wanted to avoid studio production tricks.
So they record the album in just 2 weeks at Pachyderm Studio. It cost them $25,000.
A tiny budget for the follow-up to one of the biggest albums of all time, but controversy followed almost immediately.
Stories started leaking to the press that DGC, their label, found the album unreleasable.
Those stories caused a lot of concern among fans. People thought the label was going to shelve the record.
But the reality was more nuanced.
It was. While the label may have had some reservations, the band actually had their own issues with Albini's mix. They felt the bass levels were too low on some tracks.
And the vocals weren't quite right on Heart-Shaped Box and All Apology.
Exactly. They felt those songs, the potential singles, needed a little more punch.
So they brought in REM's producer, Scott Litt, to remix just those 2 songs.
Yes. The rest of the album is the original Albini mix. And the result was an album that topped both the US and UK charts. It sold 5 million copies in the US alone.
It proved they hadn't gone mainstream. The mainstream had come to them.
That's a perfect way to put it.
For the In Utero tour, they expanded the lineup. They added Pat Smear, formerly of the punk band The Germs, as a second guitarist.
Which really filled out their live sound. And in November 1993, they recorded their now iconic MTV Unplugged performance.
That performance completely defied convention.
Totally. The expectation for Unplugged was that a band would come on and play acoustic versions of their greatest hits.
But Nirvana didn't do that.
No. Instead of playing Smells Like Teen Spirit, they played these haunting covers of songs by David Bowie and Lead Belly.
And they invited the Meat Puppets on stage.
Right. Chris and Kurt Kirkwood came out to perform 3 of their own songs with the band. It showcased a completely different, much more vulnerable side of Nirvana.
We are now approaching the final months of the band's career. In early 1994, they embarked on a European tour.
Their final concert took place in Munich, Germany on March 1st.
And just a few days later, on the morning of March 4th in Rome, Courtney Love found Cobain unconscious in their hotel room.
It was an overdose due to a combination of prescribed Rohypnol and alcohol. The rest of the tour was immediately canceled.
The timeline that follows is tragic and well documented. Cobain returned to Seattle after escaping a rehab center in Los Angeles.
On April 8, 1994, he was found dead at his home.
The forensic findings determined he had died approximately 3 days earlier, on April 5th, from a self-inflicted shotgun wound.
The immediate aftermath was just chaos. The band officially withdrew from their headlining spot at Lollapalooza. Stocks of their records ran low everywhere.
There's also a scandal at the Brixton Academy in London.
A really ugly situation. The manager lied, telling the press that fans were buying up tickets for their canceled show as a piece of history just to avoid having to refund the money.
A public vigil was held on April 10th at the Seattle Center. It drew 7,000 mourners.
And with Cobain's death, the band dissolved. Dave Grohl went on to found the Foo Fighters.
Chris Novoselic declined to join him, though.
Yeah, he felt that having the two of them in a new band right away would put too much pressure on the project, that it would always be seen as the band after Nirvana.
They did release the MTV Unplugged in New York album in November 1994, which debuted at #1 on the charts. But the story of Nirvana didn't end with the dissolution of the band. It moved into the legal arena.
It really did. This period from about 1997 to 2006 was defined by battles over the legacy and the unreleased material.
In 1997, Nirvana LLC was formed by Novoselic, Grohl, and Courtney Love as the executor of Cobain's estate to oversee these projects.
But in 2001, a major blockage occurred.
Courtney Love filed a suit to dissolve the partnership.
She did, and in doing so, she blocked the release of a planned rarity box set that fans had been waiting years for.
Her argument was that Cobain was Nirvana, and that Grohl and Novoselic were essentially sidemen or hired hands.
She claimed she had signed the original partnership agreement under bad advice and wanted it nullified.
Grohl and Novoselic then countersued. It became a very difficult, very public legal situation.
It did. But in October 2002, literally the day before the case was set to go to trial, they reached a settlement.
And this settlement finally opened the floodgates for new material.
Exactly. It allowed for the release of the compilation album, simply titled Nirvana, which featured You Know Your Worth.
The last song the band ever recorded.
And it became a significant hit more than 8 years after it was recorded. Then, in 2004, the massive box set with the lights out was finally released to fans.
In 2006, another major development, Love sold 25% of her stake in the Nirvana song catalog to a company called Primary Wave.
For an estimated $50 million. She said at the time she wanted to take the music to places that had never been before, through things like film and television licensing.
And that really brings us into the modern era of the band's legacy, an era of reunions and celebrations.
It is interesting how, after all those years of legal fighting, we started to see the surviving members come together again to play the music.
One of the most notable early moments was in 2012, and it involved Paul McCartney.
An unlikely collaboration, to say the least. Grohl, Novoselic, and Smear joined McCartney for a new song called Cut Me Some Slack.
It was for Grohl's Sound City documentary soundtrack.
And they performed it live at the 12-12-12-12 concert for Sandy Relief. It was a true blending of musical generations.
Then came the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2014.
In their first year of eligibility, which was no surprise to anyone.
And the performance at the ceremony was significant.
It was, because they used a series of guest vocalists to fill Cobain's role. It wasn't about replacing him, it was about celebrating the music.
They had Joan Jett, Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth, St. Vincent, and Lord.
A fantastic lineup. And notably during his speech, Grohl publicly thanked all the former drummers, including Chad Channing, who had been controversially omitted from the official induction list. It was a classy move.
They continued to reunite sporadically after that. There was the Cal Jam Festival in 2018 and the Art of Elysium benefit in 2020. But that brings us right up to the very recent events of early 2025.
It has been a very active start to the year for the Nirvana legacy.
On January 30th, 2025, Novoselic, Grohl, and Smear reunited for the first time in 5 years at the Fire Aid benefit concert in Los Angeles.
And the guest list for that performance was impressive.
St. Vincent came back to sing Breed, Kim Gordon did School, Joan Jett performed Territorial Pissings.
And perhaps most movingly, Dave Grohl's daughter, Violet Grohl, sang All Apologies.
This shows how the music is being passed down and reinterpreted.
Absolutely. And then just a couple of weeks later, on February 14th, 2025, they participated in the 50th anniversary celebrations for Saturday Night Live.
A major, major moment. They reunited to perform Smells Like Teen Spirit,
with Post Malone on vocals.
which again demonstrates the enduring appeal of that song across completely different genres and generations.
From the logging towns of 1987 to the SNL stage in 2025, the trajectory is just remarkable.
Before we wrap up, let's just analyze the anatomy of their sound. What actually made Nirvana sound like Nirvana?
Well, it really starts with the songwriting. Cobain had a unique method. He often wrote the lyrics minutes before recording them.
And he described his own writing style as a duality, didn't he?
He did. He said he was a nihilistic jerk half the time and vulnerable and sincere the other half. And you can hear that dichotomy in the music.
He also used that cut-up technique for lyrics, correct?
Yes, especially for Nevermind. He would compile lines from his poetry journals, cut them up, and rearrange them to create the lyrics. In Utero was a bit more focused thematically, but that fragmented, contradictory style really defined his lyricism.
And then musically, the most famous element is the dynamic contrasts.
The quiet verse leading into the loud, heavy chorus, that became their signature.
They also frequently used drop tuning.
Right, tuning the guitars down a half or full step. It made the strings looser, easier to bend, and just accommodated their heavy, hard-hitting playing style.
And what about the equipment destruction? That became a famous part of their live shows.
It did. But Novoselic revealed years later that it was actually just a routine, a shtick they developed to get off stage sooner if a show wasn't going well.
And finally, you can't talk about their sound without talking about Dave Grohl's drumming.
It's a major, major factor. Grohl took their sound to a whole new plane. His drum parts aren't just rhythm, they're distinct and musical in their own right.
You can recognize a Nirvana song just by the drum intro.
You can, even without the melody. That's a very rare quality for a drummer to have.
So, after exploring all of this, from the early days as the sellouts to the global explosion and the recent reunions, we're left with this staggering legacy.
Indeed. They're one of the best-selling artists of all time, with over 75 million records sold worldwide. But beyond the numbers, their legacy is about how they redefined what pop music could be.
It's a fascinating idea that they were a pop band at their core.
I mean, they tried to suppress their pop instincts, especially early on, to fit that sub-pop sound, but they couldn't help but write these incredibly catchy melodies. They didn't cross over to the mainstream. They brought the underground with them and made it the mainstream.
A story that continues to evolve even today.
It certainly does.
Thanks for listening.